Somebody's been watching Back to the Future! Yes, I think this episode 2 of DC Legends of Tomorrow, and perhaps the entire series, is going to borrow quite heavily from Robert Zemeckis' Opus, which did a wonderful job not only dealing with time travel, but the human element of time travel. And that, along with the visual effects, were some of my favorite things about this episode. Now, we're going to touch on a few things before we get into my best and worst lists, because I'm cheating a little bit because there's just so much to discuss. So the first thing I want to talk about, now, by the way, I have to give a warning. There are always spoilers in these reviews, so they're meant to be watched after you've seen the episode, or if you don't plan on watching the episode and you just want to catch up, because there's supposedly a really big spoiler in this episode that everyone this morning is talking about with headlines. They're like, a shocking development. Oh, the producers of the show talked to us about why they did that. And I was like, what are you talking about? So I clicked on it and they're like, we killed Hawkman. And I was like, oh, that's actually under my worst list. And it made it was such a non-element to me because the characters are there to die and be brought back. That's the whole point of their existence. So I thought that their dying was kind of par for the course, and we'll discuss that more when I get to my worst list. The Hawks, I think the Hawks we might as well call it the Hawks list, because I think they're going to have a permanent place there. But anyway, I was just really surprised to see that development spun that way. The only thing I can think of is that maybe the show didn't get off to as good a start as they had hoped over at Warner Brothers Television and the CW, so they're trying to create some really dramatic headlines. And you know what would have helped it get off to a better start? If they ran this as the 2-hour special it was obviously intended to be, instead of an hour at a time a week apart, because this second episode was much better. I really liked this episode. The first one, I really was 50-50 what I liked, what I didn't like. I had, again, a little bit of a difficult time coming up with the worst list for this second episode. And you know what? While I was watching it, I was like, I'm having such a good time. I guess I'm getting pulled into the world of Warner Brothers Television, which everybody's always telling me about with The Flash and Arrow. But my shows are Supergirl and DC Legends of Tomorrow. And it really is a very enjoyable experience. I would liken it to reading second-tier comics. Not like the top of your stack is what I mean. Those are like the movies, right? That's what movies are. They're the top of your stack, graphic novels. But these shows are like the solid performers in the middle, where, you don't read them right away, but every week or every month when you read that the latest issue of that title, you're like, that's a good read. I'm glad I buy that. Thanks for making it so I don't just buy 3 or 4 comics. I like having a stack, but it's not padding like the bottom of the stack. I think any comic book reader knows what I'm talking about. So that's how I would describe these shows. Solid middle of the stack reading. And I'm having a great time, just as I do every Wednesday when I read my comics. I also want to touch upon the fact that Neil McDonough showed up very briefly at the beginning of this episode at the weapons buy. And I was like, ooh, I guess he's the villain of the week. But he wasn't. But he's such a big actor, and he's been in movies, but he's particularly found a place for himself on the small screen. Keep an eye out for him. His character will definitely be back to the point where, since he was teased here, it makes me feel that he might be an ongoing character on the show, because why would you pay him for more than 1 week's worth of work, right? So, and he's a great actor, but I'll be curious to see how they utilize him here. All right, so let's get into the best and worst of the show. The best also was hard for me, not to fill, but to get down to 5. All right, so the thing that I liked the most about the show, by far and away, was Professor Stein's story, particularly because I didn't like the character too much last week. But this week, it was so complex and so interesting and had so many different interesting facets to it that I really had a good time with it. I loved him having this edge to him at the weapons buy. I thought that was great. My first note was, what's going on with Professor Stein? Is he moving towards bad guyness? But then they kind of showed that it was a little more sophisticated than that he just has a very difficult personality, and he had it when he was younger. That was brilliant. I didn't like the casting too much of young Professor Stein. I think they cast more for hotness than someone who actually looks like the actor playing older Professor Stein. I wasn't like, good casting. I was more like, okay, they comb their hair kind of the same way, so I guess you've told me they're the same person. That'll have to do. But, the actor playing Victor Garber, I believe, playing Professor Stein, the older version, really sold this whole storyline, and the writing as well. But I loved his realization that he hadn't changed. You think that when you get older, you'll mature, you'll become wiser, you'll stop your bad habits. I loved that he felt that he hadn't lost a lot of them. I thought that was really fascinating. And I loved the Back to the Future, like, oh, I have to get to this mixer, this faculty mixer to meet my future wife. I thought that was really great. I mean, they fixed it like in a really sloppy, episodic network television way, which we'll discuss later. But overall, I thought this was just an absolutely wonderful element to the show that they've introduced, and I can't wait to see this more human element at play in episodes going forward. So loved it. Really, really good. The next thing was, although I will admit they did cast a handsome actor. I had a note saying he was handsome when he was younger, but I think they could have found someone who looked more like a younger version of him. Now, the second thing that I liked was this new thing that they're not just fighting time, that time wants to be a certain way that was introduced in episode 1, but I also liked that they talked about that introduced the idea that they're fighting their own mistakes in time. I thought that was really good. That part of the episode was retrieving part of the Atom's suit. I thought that was a really good twist. I thought it was, again, a little bit easy that Rip Hunter automatically knew about it, and he automatically knew about the problem in the timeline. I was like, we'll talk about Rip Hunter, who I think really took a serious step back in this episode. But I also think the other problem here, potentially, even though this is a positive, I liked this addition to the show, but they do have to be careful not to run into a problem where they have like Groundhog's Day scripts, where every week, what did we mess up this time? Okay, half the team will fix what we messed up, and half the team will go on the mission. I think that could become too formulaic. But I think if used appropriately, this was a great thing to introduce to the show. Now, the third thing that I liked were those action sequences. They were amazing. They were like the kind of stuff that we were teased in the trailer. And this was one of the main reasons I tuned into the show. So I was quite disappointed last week in the pilot, episode 1, when I didn't get them. So obviously that's another reason that I think they should have aired this as a 2-hour special. Sorry, at 100, you can debut the next week. You already have your fans. I guess they're Arrow and Flash fans who are supposed to be coming over to this, but as I saw from the comments last week, a lot of you were 50-50 on this show as I was. But I hope you stuck around because it got much better much quickly. A lot like Supergirl. I don't know why, this is like becoming a TV factory for Warner Brothers, so I don't know why it's so hard for them to get them on their feet, considering this is like their, 4th and 5th time around, right? Come on. But anyway, the action sequences were amazing. The action sequence at the weapons buy was really good. A long take as well, but I thought the fight choreography was good. I thought the visual effects were very well done. The camera work, it was just really, really well done. And I liked seeing a team at work. I think teams are a lot of fun to watch when they're done correctly. That's one of the great things about, for instance, the Avengers team sequences in the movies. That's why people liked X-Men Days of Future Past, because it featured X-Men working together as a team. And so I thought that was really great. That's the next thing, having them play off of each other with their powers. That was something X-Men Days of Future Past did so incredibly well. I also thought that it was great. The other action sequence was outside of Vandal Savage's house. That was also very well done. The visual effects are excellent, although Captain Cold and Heatwave just have like 2 different guns. They could switch guns. They're like, no, we can't do that because then that would mess up our names. Then we'd just become Hot and Cold, and we don't be that much of a duo. But I was like, you guys are a little bit light on the powers. But thank goodness they're big on personality. We'll be talking about Wentworth Miller in just a moment. But I thought that Firestorm came across particularly well here. I thought that the visual effects on that character when they were, fused together and in action were great. And I love that he absorbed the energy of the nuke. They aren't really showing Firestorm use his powers the way he should. Right now he's just like absorbing and dispelling nuclear energy. He's kind of they've turned him into Bishop from the X-Men. He's supposed to be able to change the scientific makeup of elements, right? So we can turn something into something else. He could have taken that nuclear energy and turned it into another, scientific element. So maybe the writers are like, please don't do that to us. That's going to be such a headache to write. He just blasts stuff and absorbs stuff. And I'm like, okay, I guess because the visual effects look so cool on that character, I'll go along with it, but maybe not for too long. All right, and if that's just all he is, why have a professor be half of the duo? That's the whole point, that you have a professor being part of the duo, is because he comes up with the scientific equations. All right, now, fourth Wentworth Miller. Last week I was talking about Wentworth Miller and I really liked what he did in that episode. And someone wrote in the comments, they said, "Oh, I think Wentworth Miller is horrible," and I was hoping that you would agree with me. And so that really stuck in my mind. And when I was watching the episode this week, I was like, you know what? He is horrible. He is just absolutely horrible. He is chewing scenery like Grey Gardens, but he's so good at being bad and just so embraces it and is just so flamboyant in the role that it works. He's so bad he's good. That's basically how I would describe Wentworth Miller on the show. He also has fantastic lines. I loved when Brandon Ruth's character, Adam, was like, "Oh, you could have been an electrical engineer," and he said, Wentworth Miller's character said, "Dodged a bullet there." I thought that was just really fantastic about the different perspectives of the characters. I also think the show is doing a very good job of coming up with criminal tasks for those guys to do, Captain Cold and Heatwave, because it justifies them being on the show and on the team. So that was excellent. Very, very good. They know how to get into the weapons buy. They knew how to break into Vandal Savage's house. But next time, take White Canary, obviously. Although I did like that the Adams suit was just a little action figure when they were handing it around. I was like, that's very cost effective. Now, finally, I had a hard time deciding what would be my number 5, and I decided it was the spaceship den that was introduced this episode. And that was a place in the ship where they're like, the rest of the ship has really cold blue lighting, and that doesn't really lend itself to emotional scenes. So anytime someone has to have a really, strong emotional conversation, a heart-to-heart, let's send them into the space den with all the yellow warm lighting. So keep that in mind. And you saw a lot of it this time, not only with the Hawks, most of their scenes were in there, but also you saw it when, Professor Stein and Jackson decided to have a conversation. They're like, we have to really have an emotional conversation to the space den. And, the lighting worked. So I thought that was really funny. And why they would have a space den, it didn't make any sense. But I thought it was great. All right, so what were the worst things in the episode? Yeah, the Hawks, again and again and again. First off, I thought they really caved about bringing their son back. They're like, "But he's our son. Does he have to die? We have a time machine." And Rip Hunter's like, "Yeah, sorry, can't do it." And they were like, "Okay, we tried." I was like, steal the time machine. Go and do something else. I don't know. I mean, they were just like, we only knew him for 5 minutes. Whatever. We only remember our own lives together, our own romance. We never remember any of the children we have throughout the centuries. So it sucks basically to be a Hawk child. Now, I thought it was also very interesting that they've clearly set up that these characters are just going to be a horrible cycle of death and sexual frustration, right? Because they talked about the fact that they don't come back in all this coverage of Hawkman dying, they said he's going to come back as a baby. But they're time traveling, so they're just going to run into different versions of Hawkman, Carter reincarnated. They could even go into the future, get the new version that pops up when it's an adult, and take him back on the trip, right? The character isn't going anywhere. But obviously, it happened just when Hawkwoman, or Hawkgirl, was like, "Oh, I feel the love tonight, finally, but I didn't get to tell him." So I'm sure that the next time this character shows up, mark my words, he will be like, "What are you doing? Get off of me. I don't feel that way about you." And they're just going to never be at the same place romantically at the same time. So I think that's probably where this show is going. So I think this is really a challenge for the actors to keep playing so many death scenes and so many sexual frustration scenes without making it seem tiresome. Like, we do this every week, you guys. This is ridiculous. So I don't like the Hawks at all. I also feel bad for that actress. I think she looks much better with the darker hair, but I think the lighter hair plays up, the prominence of her teeth. She's a little bit like the actress who plays Megan Draper on Mad Men, who played Megan Draper on Mad Men. She has a very distinct look, and it can either be seen as a positive or a negative. And I think that the makeup and hair, the costume and makeup and hair team or whatever aren't doing her any favors on this show, this actress. All right, so what was the second thing that I didn't like? Vandal Savage. I can't believe that this is our big bad for the whole show, for the whole series. I think he's horribly cast. I called him Euro white trash last week, and I still feel the same way. I think he has no charisma, and this is someone who we have to really be like, yeah, let's go, I'm with the team. But I'm like, that guy, surely, we have a time machine. We can find a more interesting villain. Although I did love his henchman. He was so creepy. He actually reminded me a lot of Desaad, because I was researching Darkseid earlier this week because of the Empire magazine magazine photo from Batman v Superman, and I was like, I love your crazy bangs, henchman guy. You look all sickly and weird. He was kind of like a TV version of Dane DeHaan. I really liked it. But then also, he's supposed to have sexual tension with Kendra, Hawk Girl, but I didn't see that. I didn't see any chemistry there. I think you're supposed to feel it's like a love triangle, maybe, but I wasn't getting that at all. I mean, it was like the worst love triangle ever, although I think everybody would agree most love triangles aren't great. But this one was super lame, so I didn't like that at all. So I really have a problem with that character, and I wish they had cast somebody else in the role. Sorry, actor who plays Vandal Savage, who I didn't bother to learn your name. All right. So the third thing that I didn't like about the episode, now this is where it was like a little bit, those were my two main things. Everything else, I had to fill my list. And I think these are legitimate complaints, but they aren't as serious as the first two. So, sorry, I'm getting a little bit of a cold here in New York City. So the third thing that I didn't like about the episode was some of the shortcuts they took. Like Vandal Savage was like, you reverse engineer this little tiny suit in 24 hours. And I was like, isn't it 1975? Everybody here is in the right time period, and they just don't have the means. I mean, not everybody can be Martin Stein, Professor Martin Stein, with his little Dyson, particle tracker. It's just not possible. So I thought it was unreasonable of Vandal Savage to request it, and I thought it was unreasonable that it would even be possible in any capacity. So I didn't like that. Then the fourth thing that I didn't like was that Rip Hunter, after being so cool and my favorite character in the first episode, became Exposition Man in episode 2. He had nothing to do. The team revolted and was like, we hate you for lying to us, but we're going to stay on your ship anyway. You just, get in the back and tell us stuff when we need to know it, and that's it. I mean, he just was totally backbenched, I guess you could say, and he didn't do anything about it. And also Gideon, the computer program that runs the ship, could totally fill the role of Rip Hunter the way he was played in this episode. It could give the exposition. It could tell him the timeline was messed up. There's no reason to have both of them, right? Maybe Gideon's too expensive, but they could just use it as a disembodied voice, or do the old hard light hologram where Gideon appears and looks like a normal person because it's cheaper, right? You could totally do that. So I'm just a little annoyed, and I don't understand why Rip Hunter is just rolling over like this when he was such a cool character in the first episode. So the fifth thing that I didn't like, finally, was that I felt, again, this is the last one is, I'll admit, nitpicky. But I thought it was a little bit cheap the way they were all like, yes, we all hate Vandal Savage so much now that we shall chase him through time with absolutely no regard for how long we're going to be gone from our loved ones in the current time period that we left. I mean, particularly because Professor Stein just went all wishy-washy and weak at the knees for his wife, being like, I sure liked my wife. He's just like, I want to make sure we stay married, but I don't really like being around her that much. I like the idea of my wife, but not being in close proximity to her. Because he's like the whole episode was how much he liked his wife and how it was important. And I don't believe they have any kids. So he was like, oh, it's so important that we stay married and we get married. But then he was like, yes, I will fight Vandal Savage and chase him through time for who knows how long. And then I will years later, potentially return to the moment that I left. Like, sure, that person, will think that you weren't gone ever because you were in a time machine, but you're going to be gone for that long. I just thought the decision was made really easily without any emotional debate. So I think that could have been done a little bit better. But anyway, much better episode. Really liked it. Excited to see where they go next. And I also think it was funny that they're like, we paid a lot. I'm glad they could get the right time period closed finally. But I thought it was funny. They're like, we can't leave 1975 because we paid for it, and we're going to get enough out of it before we move to a new time period. Like, apparently they're not going to do a new time period every week. Or maybe they will because this was supposed to be a 2-hour premiere. But I thought that was interesting. But at least, even if they're not going to give us a new time period every week, I feel a little more confident now that they have enough story to make up for that. So what did you think of the second episode of Legends of Tomorrow? Be sure to leave your own thoughts down below. Thank you so much for watching with me. And you can check out some other episodes right now.